All right, today we are cracking open one of the most famous, most influential, and, let's be honest, one of the weirdest books ever written, Plato's Republic. This is a 2,400-year-old blueprint for the perfect society, and trust me, things are about to get wild.
The entire book, all 10 volumes of it, really just boils down to this one simple, brutal question. And it's a question that kicks off what is basically a philosophical cage match in ancient Athens, pitting our hero Socrates against a bunch of people who think that justice is for suckers.
So, in one corner, you've got Socrates, who's always wandering around asking these really annoying questions about what justice truly is. And in the other corner, you have this guy, the sophist Thrasymachus, who just crashes the party and yells that justice is nothing more than whatever the powerful people say it is. It's just a tool they use to keep everyone else in line. Basically, it's a scam.
Now, faced with this pretty devastating takedown, Socrates does something completely nuts. He says trying to figure out justice in one person's soul is like trying to read tiny little letters from far away. So to see it clearly, he's just going to blow it up to a massive scale. He decides he's going to build an entire city in his mind, a perfect city called Calliopolis, just to see what justice looks like on a grand scale.
His first draft, it's a simple, healthy town. Everyone has a job, there's enough food, it's all very peaceful. But his friends are absolutely horrified. His buddy Glaucon basically says, Socrates, this is a city for pigs. We want luxury. They want sofas and art and fancy food. Socrates reluctantly agrees, but he warns them that this new, fevered state is going to lead to war, which means they're going to need a whole new class of people. Warriors, he calls the guardians.
And the training manual for these guardians is intense, to say the least. We're talking total censorship of all art and music to make sure they're brave and obedient. Oh, and they're forbidden from owning any private property or even touching gold and silver because personal wealth would just corrupt them. They literally have to live and eat together like soldiers in a camp, so their only loyalty is to the state.
So you might be wondering, how on earth do you convince an entire society, especially these elite soldiers, to accept a system this rigid? Well, Plato has an answer for that. The rulers are going to have to tell what he calls the genion pseudos. And that translates to the noble lie. Yep, you heard that right. Let's not sugarcoat it. We're talking about state-sponsored propaganda, a foundational myth, a magnificent fiction that's told to every citizen from birth, all to make sure they accept their place in society without ever questioning it.
And here's the big lie. The gods, when they made people, mixed different metals into their souls. The rulers, they have gold in their souls. The warrior auxiliaries have silver. And all the farmers and craftsmen, well, they have bronze and iron. The whole point of this story is to make everyone believe that this social order isn't man-made, it's divine and natural.
Okay, so this is where Plato's huge social experiment all comes back to the individual. He argues that this three-part city, the rulers, the warriors, the producers, it's a perfect mirror of the human soul, which he says also has three distinct parts.
And the comparison is pretty direct. The appetitive part of your soul, your desires for food, money, pleasure, that matches up with the producer class. The spirited part, your sense of honor, your anger, your courage, that lines up with the warrior auxiliaries. And finally, the rational part of your soul, your reason and logic, is embodied by the golden guardians. And this is Plato's grand definition of justice. It's harmony. It's when each part of the city and each part of the soul does its own job and stays in its own lane, all led by reason.
So if the whole city has to be run by reason, who's the best person for the job? I mean, who can actually rule without being corrupted by greed or a lust for power? For Plato, the answer is simple, and it's maybe a little self-serving. It's a philosopher. The perfect state can only exist, he says, if philosophers become king.
To explain how you even create a ruler like this, Plato gives us his most famous metaphor of all, the allegory of the cave. He says to imagine that most of us are prisoners chained up in a dark cave staring at a wall. We see shadows flickering by and we think that's reality. But the philosopher is the prisoner who breaks free, gets dragged out into the painful, blinding sunlight of truth and sees the world as it really is. And here's the crucial part. It's their duty to go back down into the cave and try to rule, even if all the other prisoners just think they're crazy.
But here's the tragic twist. Even this perfect city is doomed to fail. Plato was pretty pessimistic. He believed that all things must eventually decay. He maps out this whole slippery slope, starting with his perfect aristocracy. Over time, it degrades into a timocracy, run by honor-obsessed warriors. Then that rots into an oligarchy, run by the rich. The poor eventually revolt, creating a democracy, which Plato saw as total chaos. And out of that chaos, a tyrant inevitably rises, creating the worst state imaginable.
So, after designing a whole city, mapping its entire rise and fall, and exploring the nature of reality itself, we finally come all the way back to the beginning. Does Plato finally have an answer for Thrasymachus? Is it actually better to be a just person? And his answer is a huge, resounding yes. Forget about your reputation, forget about external rewards. Plato says an unjust person has a sick soul. Their desires and their ambitions are constantly at war, and their reason is enslaved. But a just person, they have a healthy, harmonious soul where reason is in charge. And that inner harmony, that psychic health, that is happiness. It is its own reward.
But just in case that whole psychological argument wasn't quite enough for you, Plato ends the entire book with a kind of cosmic mic drop. He tells a story called The Myth of about a soldier who dies, gets a full tour of the afterlife, and then comes back to life to tell everyone what he saw.
So what does see? Well, he sees the just souls get rewarded for 1,000 years, while the unjust are punished tenfold for their crimes. But then comes the really important part. All the souls get to choose their next life. And who's the only one with the wisdom to choose a good life and avoid becoming a miserable tyrant next time around? You guessed it, the philosopher, the just soul. Justice pays, not just in this life, but for all eternity.
So in the end, Plato's incredible quest gives us this amazing framework for thinking about morality and the soul, but it also gives us a chillingly detailed blueprint for a totalitarian state, one built on propaganda and censorship. And that leaves us with the big, uncomfortable question that people have been wrestling with for over 2,000 years. Is Plato's perfect justice really worth the price?